Welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode of October Nights. This is the October 5th, so the 5th screening of the month, and tonight we're discussing Ben Wheatley's 2021 film, In the Earth. I know, two 2021 films back to back, but hey, what am I gonna do? I wanted to cover some more recent horror, and these two stuck out, and I was trying to, play catch up with Netflix horror, and this is a film that I missed seeing when it was in the theater for a very brief window here in the independent cinema known as Sidewalk Film Center and Cinema here in Birmingham. I wanted to check it out, and I just missed it. But I did finally get to see it because it's on Hulu. You can check it out now. If you watch this way after these videos go up, I have no clue what service it's on. Typically, I put a Just Watch link down in the description so you can check out where it's available in your country and whatever. But if you want to sponsor these videos, I'm more than happy to sell my soul to whatever company is willing to, pay me money to watch horror films. Ben Wheatley is a very interesting director. He has done films all over the map. Action thriller films like Free Fire, which had a pretty big cast like Charlton Copley, Brie Larson, Armie Hammer, Cillian Murphy, quite a few big stars. A hitman-based horror film known as Kill List, the sort of horror dark comedy known as Sightseers, a remake of Hitchcock's Rebecca, a couple of episodes of Doctor Who back in 2014, and most notably tonight, a weird film in 2013 called A Field in England. Now tonight's film kind of straddles the line between mysticism and science, and, more mystical horror and much more human-based darkness. And that might be what Ben Wheatley does best. Now, if you're not a fan of ambiguity, first off, Wheatley's films just simply aren't for you. Second off, this is not the kind of horror movie that's for you. I personally love a lot of ambiguity in my films. It gives me time, a lot of space to read in my own personal interpretation. But if that's not your jam, skip this film. Please do yourself the service. You're gonna hate it. Go watch a horror film you're gonna like. But if you're compelled, I do think this is a very deeply interesting movie from this year that, because it got buried in another year where box office hasn't quite recovered, because we're still, believe it or not, in the middle of a pandemic. This is a film that's kind of a casualty of that. But it is available for you to watch and buy, and I do think it's worth your attention, especially if you like your horror or your movies on the weirder side. Wheatley definitely, achieves that here. A Field in England is kind of a war film that takes an acid trip and becomes kind of an indefinable picture. And those more acid trip segments do kind of end up in tonight's film, In the Earth. As I said, this is a movie that combines, more mystical elements with much more human terror, and I think does it to pretty great effect. I will say that the marketing material that I had seen, and this could just be me misremembering it, made me think this was going to be much more of a just straight mystical horror film with like a creature at the heart of it. I thought this was going to be much more Blair Witch than it ended up being. That's not to say that it doesn't have vibes of that kind of Blair Witch lore in here, but it's sharing space with another kind of movie, which is a more like capture and torture type film. And there's some interesting, mystical science stuff going on here as well, communing with like forest spirits and kind of brain connectedness of nature and how it might actually have an effect on the natural world of humans and like how we interact. And it might be able to pull us in. Whether or not that has any bearing in reality, it feels real in the world that Wheatley creates, and I think that's why I really enjoyed the journey that I went on. To explain it much more than that would be to literally spoil the film, and I don't want to do that. And also, I do think this film is ambiguous in some of these areas, and I don't want to shove my interpretation down your throat so that way you don't have space to read whatever you experience here. But this is a film that definitely feels of its time, because the world that our main character comes from, here played by Joel Fry, a man by the name of Martin, he's coming to the woods to kind of escape the rest of the world, which is on lockdown because of a virus. because this is a film made in 2020 and being released in 2021. It's contemporary in that regard, but it doesn't necessarily feel like COVID specifically, more of just kind of a generic virus that has overtaken the world. And he's come here because a friend that he used to know has stopped sending him messages, and he wants to check in on her and make sure that she's doing okay, but is also interested in the research that she was doing prior to her communiques ceasing. A guide by the name of Alma, here played by Elora Torchia, takes him out into the woods to meet up with this girl that he used to know, who's now doing research out in a remote part of the woods. But the two stumble upon a strange hermit by the name of Zach, who maybe more than meets the eye and maybe a lot more sinister than he appears at first. Now, I should say this is not going to be a horror movie for everyone. Out of the movies I've covered thus far, I do think that the ones that, I've previously covered, if you can vibe with Malignant, you're going to have a great time. Every film I've covered before this, 100% I think you could totally watch those and enjoy it. This will be the most divisive film I probably covered this entire month. And that's even between people who really love horror films. I don't think that everyone's going to vibe with this. Wheatley is an interesting director, and he's kind of divisive. So whether or not you vibe with the kind of ideas that he's propagating, specifically the way he goes about telling a story, specifically when we get to the more acid trip segments, it may not work for you. And that's fine. Not every movie works for everyone. And there are parts of this movie that I don't think worked for me, but enough of it did overall that I really did enjoy it, and I especially enjoyed the ideas that it explored, some of which I wish it explored more. But I didn't make the movie, so I just gotta enjoy what we have here. I do like the fact that this kind of pairs sort of well with the previous film. It's because there's such a limited cast. We get such a small scope of both of these worlds, and in some ways, like, this film not only reflects Blair Witch because of some of the mythology that's going on in the woods around these people that we end up in, it also kind of has that feeling of perpetual lostness, in that it feels like we're seeing the same part of the woods over and over again, and we're not getting any closer to escaping. And it might be because something wants to keep you there. So I'll just leave you with that. This film has some incredibly haunting imagery, some amazing scares, and I will say, some content warning, some body horror. So if that's not something you can, deal with, this is a film that already, as I said, is pretty divisive, but that will definitely be the thing that makes you want to skip. As I said in the previous video, if you have photosensitivity at all, do not watch this film. Do not watch this movie, especially when it gets into the kind of fever dream acid trip segments. The editing gets really rapid, and there's a lot of flashing lights during several segments that would provoke people who are more prone to seizures to have them. And I don't want that on my conscience, so don't watch it if that's something that you're prone to. Stay safe. But visually, this film is super appealing. The ideas that it's trying to negotiate and deal with in some regard are super interesting, and it leaves enough up to the viewer that there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here, and I think that you could come away with a lot of different readings of this film. And frankly, that makes it very appealing for someone like me. So this may be a film that if you check it out, you may hate. Don't yell at me. I enjoyed it, but like I said, it's not for everybody. If you do check it out, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the films you check out during October nights, but specifically divisive films like In the Earth from Ben Wheatley. Regardless, I hope you've been enjoying these videos thus far, and I hope you check back in tomorrow night because we are watching, I believe, a classic horror story on Netflix. I'm trying to keep most of these movies on the major streaming services, so HBO Max, Hulu, and Netflix tend to be the ones I'm sticking with, or free services that are available nationwide. Obviously, I can only, keep up with stuff that's happening in the US, but I hope that I'm doing you justice and keeping it pretty varied thus far. Regardless, please check back in tomorrow because we got yet another wildly different film. I've been your host and curator for these October nights, and I've only got one thing left to say to you. Sweet dreams.